The wolf was once the most widely distributed land mammal in the world and ranged over most of the northern hemisphere. As the human race pushed back the frontiers, the animal that men feared and loved to hate was driven from the land. Now it's only the wildest, most remote wilderness that hears the haunting call of the wolf. But one man who's spent his life among the wolf packs of the Rocky Mountains is still fighting to preserve their right to a place in the wild. In the heart of Canada's wild Rocky Mountains, something is stirring. After 40 years of silence, wolves have returned to Banff National Park, and that makes Dr. Paul Paquet a very happy man.
I can never and have never been able to explain my personal interest in wolves. I've always for me it's a romance. It's literally that. It's a love affair.
Paul Paquet is a wildlife biologist, a wolf expert who heads the most extensive wolf research project in North America, which for the last 10 years has focused its attention on Banff National Park. In the 1950s, wolves had been banished from this parkland. Humans and wolves shouldn't mix, the government decreed. The bounty hunter's gun made sure. But in the early 80s, they began to make a comeback, and as they did, Paul Paquet was there. What Paquet wanted to know was how resilient and adaptable the wolf really was. How much human interference in their wilderness home could the animals tolerate? Wolf packs are large extended families, and like any family, everyone knows their place. The wolf's body language can reveal the hierarchy of the pack. The tail is a sure pointer as to status.
The higher the tail, relative to the back of the body, the more either aggressive or dominant that animal tends to be. The more erect that animal is, the more dominant they tend to be. At the top of each wolf pack, we usually find a dominant male and a dominant female. And then there's subordinates under each of those, so that we might have two different lines of dominance, one for males, one for females. And then there is, within most wolf packs, a male or female who leads the entire pack, and it's one of the two dominants. We do know that aggression is part of it. And the ability to dominate another animal. And that could be either physical domination or psychological domination. It can be either a male or a female who is pack leader.
But it took a woman to notice that female wolves could be top dog in the group. Almost by accident, one of Paquet's students cottoned onto something that all the men had missed.
She came back with information that was very different from what I had been observing for the previous 4 years. But I did take the time to go down and observe while she was observing. And it turned out that she was right. Indeed, we had a female who was leading the pack, not the male that I'd been identifying for so long. It was a real lesson to me as a scientist, I can tell you. I'd say more than 50% of our packs are led by females.
Wolf society is like a soap opera, particularly when it comes to the mating season. Generally, only one pair will mate from each pack. The dominant female sees off all the other females from the pack who become temporary outcasts. The dominant male does the same.
Wild wolves only breed once a year. The females come into estrus, or a period of fertility, usually in January, February, March, and litters are usually born in April or May.
Dominant wolves tend to stick with the same partners, but from year to year the social pecking order can change, and this year's top dogs could lose their dominant position, and with it, the right to mate. In the spring, soon after the frost is out of the ground, the female wolf digs a den, and soon after that delivers a litter of cubs. Paquet becomes so attached to his wolves that he gives them names. This is Queenie, a young female who'll eventually become leader of the pack. Some fellow scientists shake their heads in disapproval at such naming, but Paquet is undeterred. Queenie's mate Columbo fulfills his role as the good father. He stays busy bringing food to the den for mother and the pups. Wolves are good parents, and other members of the pack will also lend a hand, scavenging for prey and babysitting the cubs. A wolf pack is a hierarchy. Most groups have less than 7 animals, but there can be 20 or 30. Top dog status is afforded to only one breeding pair, called the alpha male and the alpha female. In this case, Queenie, the light grey, and Columbo, the tan. Anyone else is definitely lower class, and they know it. Behaviour in so many ways is like our domestic dogs. In this case, Queenie is showing she's boss. She stands tall. She holds her tail high. She makes the moves.
Now, the response of the subordinate wolf is to do just the opposite. The body position will become lower and lower. It may even roll over to expose itself to the more dominant wolf. Again, thinking of the tail right up against the belly. And that wolf is saying to the more dominant wolf, "Look, I respect your position, I respect you, I'm subordinating myself to you."
Queenie and Columbo are not particularly aggressive, but what they say goes, almost without question. When it comes to hunting, it's the leader that makes the running. Marking the pack's territory is his or her responsibility. Interlopers are not exactly welcomed. A pack doesn't hunt aimlessly. They'll use familiar trails, and their territory will depend on how much game is available. And if you ever wondered why your dog likes to play tug-of-war with a towel, well, it comes programmed in the genes. Canada's northern latitudes and wild places still hold 40 or 50,000 wolves, so the species Canis lupus doesn't yet have its head on the block. But their future, according to Paul Paquet, is far from rosy.
We have to make certain that we have wild areas for wild wolves. And if we don't have those, we probably won't have wolves in the long-term future.
The wolf has always had a fearsome reputation, the most efficient predator in the forest, the one to watch. But more often than not, the legend was larger than life. Even wolves don't always get their way. Their resilience is quite amazing when you consider that humans have tried 3 times this century to wipe them out. Ranked as public enemy number 1, wolves were baited with poisoned meat. They'd been hunted, trapped, and shot. All over North America, a bounty on their heads pushed wolves to the edge of extinction. But every time humans tried to get rid of them, these incredibly adaptable creatures made a comeback.
We've had recolonization of wolves 3 times in this century, and each time they've been able to come back to habitat that was not lost. And this time, in the future, they may not be able to come back because now we're developing that habitat upon which they're most dependent. The wolf has a very important position in the ecosystem. The wolf is an apex predator because it earns its living by killing other animals, so it's right at the top of the food chain. As a consequence, we can use the wolf as an entry point into understanding the system because everything the wolf does, from what we're learning, tends to ripple throughout the system.
Because nature will not tolerate a vacuum, as wolves vanished, other smaller predators stepped in to replace them.
Some of those smaller predators are often ones that people might not want around. We might see more skunks and raccoons in some areas.
With fewer wolves, the elk herds grew larger and began to overgraze.
In Banff National Park, for example, and probably in the Rockies throughout, there is early evidence that aspen populations, these are aspen trees, and that they're starting to decline and may even at some point disappear from the system as a consequence of having predators out of the system.
If the elk were to eliminate the aspen, songbirds would suffer, and so would all kinds of other animals, plants, and insects dependent on aspen. The same's true of spruce, willow, and alder. The loss of wolves cannot be lightly ignored. As vast and spectacular as the Canadian Rockies are, only a tiny fraction is prime habitat for most of the wildlife. The rugged mountains restrict this productive land to a long, narrow strip along the valley floor, a corridor where the wildlife congregates. The fertile Bow River Valley is prime bottomland, suitable for numerous grazing animals. And for the wolf, the area's top predator, that means a full belly.
It was attractive to the wolves because it was very high quality habitat since it had been disturbed previously. And then the elk and the deer, and in some cases even the sheep, had come back here to take advantage of the new grass that was planted to restore the area. So the wolves were attracted in here.
This particular spot has been critical to the survival of the wolf packs. It's here the mothers come to have their cubs every year.
This area is a den site nearby. It's a rendezvous site. A rendezvous site is essentially a home site where pups are cared for, not unlike a daycare center.
When the town of Banff was established, it was built in the worst possible location, blocking the intersection of several major valleys. Bad news for migrating wildlife. The wolves were to the west of the town, but their prey, the elk, were concentrated on the other side of the tracks. To reach the elk, the wolves would have to run the gauntlet of highway and railroad to make their way through the town. The elk have become used to humans and have become quaint conversation pieces for tourists in downtown Banff. But the timber wolf, by contrast, is a shy, retiring creature that shuns human habitation. It's a catch-22 situation. The more people want to savour the wilderness of the park and look at wild animals, the greater is the need for new roads and parking and hotels. Key areas of the habitat are under attack, and all the time the very wolves the tourists came to see are finding mere survival almost impossible.
I concluded, after intense 8 years of study, that wolves will not continue to coexist here with humans. They at some point will lose them, unless we do something very, very dramatic. And unfortunately, I don't think that we have either the political will or the will just as users of the park to do what's necessary to preserve wolves in this valley.
Paul Paquet lives in the small prairie town of Meacham, Saskatchewan. He'd be the first to admit that his long-time love affair with wolves has not been easy. Pet animals can be sheltered and kept relatively free from harm. But Paul always knew that forming an emotional bond with a wolf was a different matter. The outcome could never be certain. Diane was the alpha female, leader of the pack in the Bow River Valley, one of the first wolves that Paquet had studied closely for several years running. Diane's first setback came when she was displaced by another female, kicked out of the pack and forced to run as a lone wolf for one entire winter. The following spring, Diane made a dramatic comeback. The female that had displaced her was killed on the Trans-Canada Highway, leaving a litter of puppies only 10 days old.
Of course, at that time we thought, well, this is a real problem. What do we do? Do we intervene? Do we help these pups survive? Because we know they're not going to survive. There aren't any other real adult females in the pack.
Even if they don't have a litter of their own, female wolves, amazingly, are able to produce milk. But there were no adult females around until Diane mysteriously reappeared from another valley many miles away, just in time to save the pups.
Within a day and a half or 2 days, Diane came back and showed up with that pack. She then adopted those pups and together with the other pack members successfully reared those pups. By September, they were traveling together as a pack. She had reintegrated herself into that pack as the dominant female.
But then, another setback. A year later, Diane got mange, a skin disease that weakened her, and she was exiled from the pack once again.
The only way she could survive was along the rail. And she was very much like a bag lady in the downtown area, and she patrolled the rail and scavenged for carcasses, animals killed by trains, which she fed upon, and she made it through the winter. We thought, well, she'll pull it off one more time.
Sadly, as is so often the case in the wild, there was no Disney ending. Diane was crushed beneath the wheels of a freight train.
It is a real emotional experience when an animal that you're attached to is killed on a highway and you find only the pieces or a bit of the head or the tail or a squashed face. You know, that really affects you in a way that many people, I think, can comprehend. But the irony is that here we are, we're in a national park. This is a protected area. This is a sanctuary, an area where animals like wolves should be able to thrive. It's very easy for us to put wolves into a zoo, which this is quickly becoming. And in some cases, it might even be better in that the chances of dying on highways and being run over by trains just don't exist in the zoo, and they're provided for. Then I keep asking myself, are they happy? I mean, do they enjoy this life? Are they living a life as they should live? As a scientist, people just are appalled when you ask questions like that. I mean, how do you quantify a question like that? And why would you even ask that? You know, you're extending your emotions into something that you shouldn't be doing, so you lose your objectivity and your rationality.
The Cascade Pack down here. It looks like we've got 13 animals in there.
It's been an uphill struggle for Dr. Paquet's favourite animal. But it's difficult to see how Banff National Park can accommodate ever-growing human intrusion and still allow the wolves space to roam. But the problems don't seem to get Paul Paquet down.
I'm never pessimistic. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this if I was pessimistic. Of course you can turn it around. When you see what we saw today, and you see 13 wolves in a wilderness area in a national park, and this is a pack that's protected, and you know, it's just sheer joy, and it's emotion that overwhelms me, and that'll stay with me until I see them the next time. And this is, for me, it's a fix, and I've just gotten my fix, and I hope that that'll last through Christmas, and I'll be back to get more. I mean, I never get enough.
Paul Paquet attributes his love of wolves to the fact that wolf society reminds him so much of the human race. Both are top dogs. Both are predators. But therein lies the problem. Perhaps both cannot survive together. However, for our own conscience, as well as for the sake of balance in our natural world, we have to try. We owe it to the wolf.